Q14. Write a note on the impact of the First World War on India. Impact of the First World War on India. The First World War, 1914 to 1918, was a watershed moment in modern Indian history. Though fought primarily in Europe and the Middle East, its reverberations were felt across the globe, and India, then under British colonial rule, was deeply affected. The war altered India's political trajectory, strained its economy, reshaped society, and ultimately accelerated the demand for independence. India's contribution was immense, yet the rewards were meager, leaving behind a legacy of disillusionment and radicalization that transformed the nationalist movement. India's contribution to the war effort. When Britain declared war on Germany in August 1914, India was automatically drawn in as part of the British Empire. The colonial government mobilized India's resources extensively, troops and labor. Over 1.3 million Indian soldiers and laborers were sent overseas. They fought in diverse theaters: France, Belgium, Mesopotamia, Gallipoli, East Africa, and Palestine. Around 74,000 soldiers lost their lives, and thousands more were wounded. Punjab, in particular, bore the brunt of recruitment, leading to resentment in rural communities. Material supplies. India provided grain, cotton, jute, leather, iron, steel, and even animals like horses and mules. Indian railways and industries were harnessed to sustain Britain's war machine. Financial support. India contributed nearly £146 million as a gift to Britain, apart from war loans and bonds. Princes and merchants were pressured to donate generously, while ordinary taxpayers bore the burden of increased levies. This massive contribution was made without democratic consent, highlighting India's colonial subjugation. Economic consequences. The war placed enormous strain on India's economy. Taxation and inflation. Customs duties were doubled, and income tax was introduced for the first time. Prices of essential commodities nearly doubled between 1914 and 1920, severely affecting peasants and workers. Agrarian distress. Rural areas faced forced recruitment, higher taxes, and food shortages. Crop failures in 1918 to 1919 worsened the crisis, leading to famine-like conditions. Industrial growth. Ironically, the decline in imports due to wartime disruptions allowed Indian industries to expand. Companies like Tata Iron and Steel flourished, and a new capitalist class emerged. This industrial growth later provided financial backing to nationalist politics. Thus, while some sectors benefited, the majority of Indians endured hardship and poverty. Social impact. The war years were marked by widespread suffering. Spanish flu pandemic. 1918 to 1919, returning soldiers carried the virus, which killed an estimated 12 to 17 million Indians, making it one of the deadliest episodes in Indian history. The colonial government's inadequate response deepened public anger. Famines and droughts. Crop failures and food shortages compounded misery, while hoarding and profiteering worsened inequality. Returning soldiers. Veterans brought back exposure to democratic ideals and racial equality abroad. Their disillusionment with colonial discrimination fueled anti-British sentiment. The war thus intensified social unrest and created fertile ground for political mobilization. Political impact. The war years transformed India's political landscape. Home Rule movement. 1916, led by Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Annie Besant, the movement demanded self-government. It revived the Congress and politicized new generations. Lucknow Pact, 1916 Congress, and the Muslim League united, agreeing on joint demands for constitutional reforms. This temporary Hindu-Muslim unity was a significant milestone. Montague Declaration, 1917. The British promised progressive realization of responsible government. This led to the Government of India Act 1919, which introduced limited reforms but disappointed nationalists by retaining British control over key areas. Rise of Gandhi. The hardships of war created conditions for Gandhi's mass politics. His emphasis on nonviolent resistance and mobilization of peasants and workers marked a new phase in the freedom struggle. Khilafat and non-cooperation movements. 1919 to 1922, post-war disillusionment merged with global Islamic concerns over the Ottoman Caliphate. Gandhi allied with Muslim leaders, launching mass protests against British rule. Thus, The war catalyzed the transition from elite-led petitions to mass-based nationalist movements. Cultural and intellectual awakening. The war also stimulated cultural and intellectual ferment. Press and literature. Newspapers like Kesari, Maratha, New India, and Commonwealth spread nationalist ideas and criticized colonial policies. Global exposure. Indian soldiers' experiences abroad challenged racial hierarchies. They returned with heightened awareness of liberty and equality, strengthening demands for independence. Emergence of radicalism. Disillusioned youth turned to revolutionary activities, inspired by global anti-imperialist movements. Organizations like the Ghadar Party intensified their efforts during the war. Long-term repercussions. The First World War left a lasting legacy. Mass nationalism. The war transformed the freedom struggle into a mass movement, involving peasants, workers, and women, not just elites. Communal politics. While the Lucknow Pact showed unity, post-war politics also saw the growth of communal divisions, later exploited by the British. Industrial and political awakening. The rise of Indian capitalists and the exposure of soldiers abroad created new social forces that demanded political rights. Road to independence. The war exposed Britain's dependence on India, emboldening nationalist leaders to demand full independence rather than incremental reforms. The conclusion. The First World War was a turning point in India's history. It drained the economy, devastated society, and exposed colonial exploitation. Yet, paradoxically, it also united political forces, nurtured industrial growth, and gave rise to Gandhi's leadership. The war years marked the transition from moderate constitutional demands to mass-based agitation, laying the foundation for India's eventual independence. In short, the war was both a tragedy and a catalyst, deepening suffering but also accelerating the march toward freedom.